April 14th, 1935, began with something almost mythical for the Great Plains that spring. Clear blue sky. After weeks of choking dust, families finally stepped outside without scarves over their faces. Children chased each other in the yards. Farmers fixed fences and checked crops. One Oklahoma family said later, "It felt like the day God gave back the sun." By late afternoon, around 4 p.m., the sky betrayed them. A purple-black bruise appeared on the horizon, small at first, then swelling, then rising. Dust storms were familiar, but this one climbed higher and higher until it looked like an upside-down waterfall, its edge boiling and curling at the top. The wall towered more than 600 feet, taller than a 50-story building, and stretched hundreds of miles across. Eyewitnesses said it felt like watching the sky divide into two worlds, calm blue above, and a seething black mass consuming the earth below. Then the sound came, a deep vibration, like steel grinding against sky. But just before impact, the roar vanished. A vacuum-like silence fell over the land, thick and wrong, as if the storm had swallowed sound itself. And then the blackout hit. Visibility didn't merely drop, it collapsed. People couldn't see their own hands 2 inches from their faces. A boy named Tommy Peckham stumbled blindly to a house, knocked, and whispered, "I'm lost." It was his own home. Static electricity surged so intensely that metal objects snapped with blue sparks. Travelers felt burning zaps across their ears. Radios died instantly. Engines shorted out. The air smelled of dirt and ozone, a dry, metallic scent that burned the throat. Inside homes, families jammed wet sheets under doors, praying the dust wouldn't suffocate them. Outside, livestock froze in total night, unable to move or cry out. The blackout lasted 12 minutes in some towns, 20 in others, longer in places, but for many, it felt eternal. This wasn't nature misbehaving. This was the land striking back, revenge engineered by human hands over 30 years. If total night swallowed your house at 4 p.m., no warning, zero visibility, would your instinct be escape or lockdown? The Great Plains were never meant to be a farm. That's not a metaphor, it's ecology. For thousands of years, this prairie was anchored by buffalo grass, a plant so tough its roots plunged up to 6 feet into the earth, braiding a hidden net that locked the soil in place. In wet years it thrived. In dry years it didn't die. It waited. The plains survived because the grass knew how to hold the ground still. Then came the late 1800s and early 1900s, bringing newcomers armed with steel confidence and new machines. The steel plow bit into ground that wooden plows had never tamed, and gasoline tractors multiplied that power. What had once resisted farming finally cracked open, and opportunity poured out. The U.S. government accelerated it. Homestead acts, booster campaigns, and railroad promotions portrayed the prairie as America's next agricultural empire. The deal was simple: plow it, and it's yours. And the myth that fueled the frenzy was even simpler. Rain follows the plow. Railroad companies promised. A myth disguised as science. Settlers believed it. Nature, unfortunately, obeys physics, not optimism. Then came World War I, and wheat prices exploded. Farmers tore up everything: grasslands, prairies, even the fragile, semi-arid zones old-timers warned against touching. Tractors screamed across the horizon. Within a single generation, the prairie became a wheat factory. Here's a snapshot of that transformation. A Kansas farmer renting a 640-acre tract, a full square mile, watched his neighbors do the same. A few decades earlier, working that much ground would have been impossible. With a tractor, he shredded buffalo grass that had stood longer than human memory. His neighbors followed. Section by section, the prairie was skin bare. Then the economy collapsed. By 1929, wheat was nearly worthless. But farmers couldn't stop. Many were drowning in debt from their shiny new machinery. So they plowed more, desperate to plant their way out of ruin. The desperation of the Depression became the final trigger. When the rains failed in 1931, the exposed soil loosened. By 1933, the first black blizzards rose, unnatural, rising like smoke from a continent. The soil was beginning to move, and soon it would move with electricity, charging the air itself. Early afternoon, April 14th, 1935. In some parts of Oklahoma, the sun still shone, and children played outside. In Texas, the day felt ordinary enough that families were hanging laundry and working in fields. But across the plains, something subtle shifted, so fast most people didn't register it. The wind changed direction in a single, sharp breath. Then came the sound. Not thunder, not any normal weather noise. More like the low metallic growl of the earth exhaling. a vibration rolling across the horizon. People looked up, and they froze. A shape was rising, too tall, too solid, too fast. A dark mass boiling upward, as though the ground itself were being peeled off. Witnesses later said it looked alive, curling at the top like a breaking wave. The storm hit Oklahoma around 4 p.m., Texas by evening, but everywhere it appeared, the reaction was the same: disbelief, then fear. The first wind blast didn't just gust. It struck, carrying sand so fine it felt like needles. Hats ripped away. Laundry vanished sideways. Chickens panicked and ran in circles. Mothers screamed for children. Every instinct said, run. But the darkness outran them. The sun blinked out. One moment the sky was bronze. The next it was pure black, as if someone had dropped a curtain over the world. People could see no more than an arm's length. Cars stalled. Horses reared. Some described it as being trapped inside ink. Then the air changed. It turned electric. Not metaphorically, but literally. Dust particles grinding against each other generated massive static charges. Blue sparks snapped off windmills. Doorknobs shocked like live wires. Fences glowed. People saw thin blue flames dance at the ends of metal tools. And the smell, sharp, metallic, unmistakable. Ozone mixed with raw earth. The taste was worse, dry, gritty, flour-fine dust that coated tongues and teeth instantly. People tied wet sheets over their faces. It didn't help. The dust seeped through every fiber, every crack, every keyhole. Inside houses, the black storm pressed against windows like a physical creature. Lamps barely cut through the void. Children cried. Radios crackled with static bursts so strong stations vanished. The storm moved on, but not gently. It crawled, consuming farm after farm. The darkness sometimes lasted 12 minutes, sometimes 20, sometimes 45. No one knew if their house would still be standing when the void lifted. This wasn't a storm anymore. It was a moving, electrified continent of dust, and it was only gaining strength. When the storm finally passed, the quiet felt unnatural, like sound itself had been smothered. People opened their doors slowly, stepping into a world that didn't look damaged so much as erased. Dust lay in dunes against fences and barns, some drifts 6 feet high. Cars were buried up to their windows. Chickens suffocated where they stood. Families found livestock collapsed in the yard, nostrils packed with silt as fine as flour. Inside, nothing was safe. People swept until their hands blistered, only to find a new film settling an hour later. Children wore flour sacks over their heads as makeshift breathing masks just to fetch water or feed animals. Indoors, the dust infiltrated everything, ruining clock gears, jamming radios, coating every meal with a bitter grit. It wasn't just in the house. It became the house. Then came the coughing. Doctors called it dust pneumonia, lungs inflamed and filling with the same soil the storms carried. Kansas recorded 17 deaths within 10 days of Black Sunday alone. These weren't frail or elderly victims. They were farmhands, young mothers, children. Their lungs simply couldn't keep the earth out. People adapted with strange new rituals, stuffing wet towels under doors, taping windows shut, sleeping with damp cloths over their faces, shaking blankets each morning and watching dust fall like flour. But the greater storm was psychological. Families who had lived on the plains for generations now felt hunted by the very ground beneath them. Some fled west, carrying what little they could. And when they arrived, they faced a final insult. They were all called Okies, a slur applied to every Dust Bowl refugee, even though only a fraction had come from Oklahoma. The black blizzards didn't just strip the soil. They stripped dignity, identity, and the belief that life would ever return to normal. By 1935, people had stopped debating whether the storms were natural or moral. The question was practical. How do you stop the earth from moving? The answer came from a man everyone called Big Hugh, Hugh Hammond Bennett, a soil scientist who had been warning about erosion for more than a decade. In early April 1935, Bennett finally got a hearing before Congress. He laid out the science. Soil is a living system, not an infinite resource. As he spoke, a dust storm rolled into Washington. Dust so far-traveled it blackened the Capitol windows. Bennett pointed to the dimming panes and told the committee, "Gentlemen, that's Oklahoma blowing by." The spectacle changed the mood in the room. Lawmakers who had dismissed him as alarmist now faced the proof. Congress moved fast. By April 27, 1935, the Soil Conservation Service was created under the Department of Agriculture. What followed was an audacious national experiment, teaching farmers to stop fighting the land and start tending it. The programs were practical and specific. Shelter belts, Rows of trees planted in long belts to block wind. Eventually 220 million trees across the plains. Contour plowing and terracing, working with a land shaped to slow water and hold soil. Strip cropping and stubble mulching, alternating crops and leaving crop residue to protect the ground. Restoring native grasses to rebuild living root networks. It wasn't charity. By 1936, tens of thousands of farmers, about 40,000, had enrolled in conservation programs, and roughly 5.5 million acres were managed under new practices. Small experiments scaled to entire watersheds. Where methods were adopted, erosion dropped dramatically. Within a few years, many regions saw soil loss fall by a large fraction. Still, the change was a cultural revolution as much as a technical one. Farming shifted from extraction to stewardship. People learned to hold the soil rather than rip it away. The Dust Bowl eventually eased. The land slowly recovered, and rain returned. But the real question is less whether the fields were saved than whether the lesson stuck. Because the same ingredients, short-term greed, exposed soil, and drought, are not confined to history. The Dust Bowl feels like ancient history, a catastrophe sealed in black and white photographs. But the forces that created Black Sunday didn't stay in 1930s. Some of them have returned, quietly, steadily. Only this time, the danger isn't confined to the plains. Across the Great Plains today, droughts strike twice as often as they did a century ago. In western Kansas and the Oklahoma Panhandle, scientists measure topsoil loss matching early 1930s erosion curves. The same slope, the same acceleration, the same warning signs. A landscape drying, a landscape thinning, a landscape vulnerable again. But this time, the wind is only one threat. Across the American West, the Colorado River is shrinking. The Ogallala Aquifer, the underground lifeline for 8 states, is collapsing so fast that in some counties the water table has fallen 150 feet in just 50 years. Fields once green under center pivot irrigation now lie abandoned, turning to the same fine, flour-smooth silt that defined the 1930s. And then there are the megafarms, where thousands of small operations once dotted the plains. Vast industrial farms now plow exponentially larger footprints. When the soil fails, it fails at scale. The parallel is unsettling. A drying climate, exposed earth, shrinking water, and an agricultural system stretched to the breaking point. The recipe is familiar. Too familiar. If history hands us a warning this clear, showing exactly what drought, exposed soil, and human certainty can unleash, will we listen this time? Or are we preparing to repeat the collapse? Because the truth is, the next Dust Bowl won't begin with a dramatic storm. It will begin quietly, the moment a region crosses its unseen threshold, the moment the soil can no longer hold. The next Dust Bowl won't start in the plains. It'll start somewhere no one expects. A place already drying, already cracking, already primed for a storm it cannot survive.